So currently I'm principal IT consultant with Codecentric, but from 1st of June I'm a freelancer. And okay, so I will introduce you into DevOps. It's a different kind of introduction because usually people tell you about technology and they tell you about what cool Docker things you can do. And I more likely want to tell you what bullshit you get into if you, from the organizational point of view, what DevOps means. So, yeah, I'm a maverick. I would say, in German, I would say it's Querdenker, something like that. I'm a hardware phobiker. Still, I'm very interested in DevOps. I'm started with Unix, but I wouldn't say I know a lot about Unix. But still, I claim a little bit. So the content will be about the challenges which we have in IT operations, the characters, values, and experience, what kind of guys are in that area, then what is the know-how, what's the company culture, and what DevOps, how it can work. But I want to make it differently. As I said, I want to involve you more interactively, and you can also tell me your experience in that area. So what is the challenge for operations? I don't know if you can see that nicely because I think it's too light here. It's a classical waterfall thing. I think it's already dead since 20 years, but it's still alive. And when you go to operations, it's very much alive. So I think for development, somehow if you're lucky, you're in an agile environment. I think when you come to operations, you have to be in a startup to have an agile environment in operations. So incremental, it's for developers, it's very clear what this means and what the advantages are. But for the operations, it's basically always about provisioning time. I was a lead architect for a big trading site, and our problem was not to build time to build our development stuff. It was usually the time we waited for some VMwares to be provisioned or some hardware to be driven from one place to the other place. So we had to wait sometimes for 1-2 weeks before we could do something. So from the technology, you can see, I think, developers have no problem with all that. Amazon Web Services, Docker, Redis, Cassandra, VMware, there are quite a lot of new technologies, and they really shape our way of working. But the problem is that often the operations guys, they are very happy that they have virtualization, okay? They're very proud of that, and sometimes they are proud of that for the last 10 years. And then if you tell them, oh, you see, there are different things, and they're like, oh, no, don't break it, we want to keep things. So there's a big friction in that. Can you confirm that, or? Okay. So what happens usually is that you have this nice flower, okay? It's a development flower thing, you have made it, it's a beautiful product, and then it gets to operations, and then those guys don't know how to water it, okay? They don't have read the manual and they don't know, and so basically a lot of things die when it comes for production. So they usually don't enter the production phase at all. And there is also no commitment there because things been invented by development, though there's no buy-in by the operations part. So I want to tell you about the characters of what kind of personality is working in development and operations. And I hope it will going to change soon. And of course, there are no stereotypes, but of course, there are stereotypes. So the developer is more the creative guy. And I was in India for 3 years, and I like the Asian religions, and they have Shiva, which is a kind of destroyer and a creator. So it basically has two roles. It likes to destroy something and then it creates something new. And this is a little bit like developers, because developers, they lose the interest on something if it works. They are always one step ahead, saying that, oh, this framework is cool, we should do this, instead of saying, okay, we try to manage what we have achieved. So that means they are the creative force in the company. And you have, of course, some of the developers, they have this craftsmanship thing, so they want to really do things neatly, and there is always a friction also a little bit, but still it's one community and somehow they get along with it. So they have test-driven development and continuous integration. I just skip over that, okay, because I think you know all that. It's continuous delivery is something new now, so for developers, and also for operations. And what I often hear is, oh yeah, we introduced continuous delivery and we can theoretically deploy every day. And then when you really dig into it, you can see, okay, they are developing once a week or twice a week because it's still too painful to do it. So often the targets you get in management when they say we want to have continuous delivery, and what you really can do is kind of two worlds. And developers, they love tools, so they are always searching for that SWORD thing, okay, that Avalon thing, right? Though they talk about languages and how this language is going to transform the whole business and how 35 lines of code are much better than 45 lines of code. And so it's a lot about guilds and religion and this thing. It's also about kind of legacy things, okay? Developers, they don't like to deal with legacy, but they're leaving their own legacy, actually, but this is a different thing. So they become creative in putting new things into the old thing. And they don't care too much about if it fits properly or not. I don't know if you have seen that in your code. I've seen a lot of things where someone said, yeah, but we could do it differently. Let's use a new utility. And finally, you end up with two different architectures in one product. Or is it also your experience, or yeah? You're lucky if you have two. Huh? You're lucky if you have only two. Yeah, exactly. Like I had with a dating site, we had one single thing which was doing the billing. It was running some Oracle cluster with JBoss on it. And in the whole company, there was nothing like that. It was all some Tomcat with some Spring container. And then they told me, yeah, but we had two consultants, and they implemented the billing thing, and they knew about JBoss, and they knew about Oracle, and then they left this. And we had a big Postgres cluster in the database, and we had this exotic Oracle thing. No one knew how to really work with it. And we were just lucky that it just continued to run, because we had no one really with the know-how to keep it running properly. So I think developers, it depends on, of course, a company culture, which I come later. They like to break things. So they are more adventurous. And the administrator is somehow the, how do you say, the duality. There's duality, and there is always one thing and the other thing, and they're complementary to each other. And the administrator is a complementary to the developer. So it tries to keep things. Though there is a god in India which is called Vishnu. He's the keeper. He keeps the whole thing running. So he also has to maintain things. And usually when you're a housekeeper and you have an architect and a developer who like fancy things, they don't think about cleaning windows or something like that. So as an administrator, you always get the shit at the end. You say like, oh, fuck, I got this really beautiful building and I don't know how to clean it properly because it's not really maintainable. And then as an administrator, you don't care about test-driven blah, blah, blah things, yeah? Because for you, usually errors are not reproducible. I mean, when they hit production, usually you don't get errors which are easily repeatable. That's a fact. I mean, I'm more than 20 years in that business. I started with telecommunications, with a lot of distributed systems, which are now fancy again with microservices, which I'm slightly, well, I'm not so happy with microservices because I know what bullshit you get into when things are distributed. But usually you have things which are not, which are unexpected. And with operators, they are more they are in a pack. Okay, they are like werewolves. They are not vampires. And so they means they stick together and they have secrets which they have to share because they are the only guys who have the admin password and they have the root privilege and all that stuff. So somehow they gang together, and often when you look at the organizational structure, they have this leading wolf kind of thing. And they also talk differently. They have this kind of thing. So they have a lot of guidelines, of course, what you can do and what you cannot do. And they have audits, which they always get scared with. Like if you work for a bank, for example, if you're an admin in a bank, you always have this schizophrenic thing, like they are saying, yeah, when the finance guys are coming and they make the audit, everything has to be okay. And then the development guy says, yeah, but we still have to deploy something on your machine. You have to give us access rights and so on. So somehow they are always paranoid that they cannot achieve that. Of course, all of them are somehow dreaming of automation. But the nice thing I found is they're dreaming of some different automation. I was asking, in that dating site, I was asking one of those Nazi administrators. They were also nice ones, but this was a Nazi one. What is your kind of DevOps thing? And he said, oh, yes, I always wanted to automate what we're doing now. And this was a real bullshit workflow they had. And I said, yeah, okay, give them the tools, and they're going to make bullshit automated workflows. Instead of going together and, let's say, try to simplify things because operators and developers work closer together, no, it's just to automate my stuff. Huh? It's still about me and you. Or like I was working for a bank where I set up some Hadoop clusters and automatically provisioning. And then the developer said, like, yes, you DevOps. I said, no, man, this is wrong. Huh? There's no you and me, there is us. DevOps means us. So when we automate something, we should automate our workflow. And of course, we should discuss our workflow, because that's DevOps. For me, DevOps is a chance to discuss about the workflow together, and not from one side and the other side. So administrators like monocultures. Why? Because they can read the installation guide of Tomcat, and they can make it foolproof, and they can also make it secure and hardening and so on, but they don't need to do it for many, many tools, like how do I make Redis hardening and. So for an administrator, he likes it like that. I mean, developers like more the kind of multiplicity. For every solution, we should have a different framework. We should have a different tool. Security, of course, for administrators is much more important. That's why it's also, I think, there's a lot of discussion coming now with Docker and that stuff. Why? Because every developer who has no idea about infrastructure feels like someone who can play God and make infrastructures. But finally, he doesn't think about security. Like, what's the security flaws in Docker? What are the containers problems you have in? They have no idea about that. But the only thing what you get is saying like, yes, I have my solution is ready. You just need to deploy it. And the operator is saying, oh my God, I'm not deployed. I don't know what's in there. So if you don't have a DevOps culture, this will not work. It will just create a big mess. Yeah, and then you have the manager of the whole thing. Actually, there are two managers usually. I don't know. You have two different managers for development and IT operations, or who has one manager for both? Wow, cool. I know there's at least two people. So this is basically, they always run to their manager, which is a CTO. And then they have to, they quarrel and say, oh, no, it's you. No, it's you. It works like that, usually. So the developer, they become faster and faster. It's not, I've done this slide not before. Docker was very high peak, but it's cool. The developers are starting to make this many solutions, and then they are blaming the operators because they cannot get this thing out. So usually when you increase someone's production, you have to ensure that all the complete pipeline is improved. But what you still find in a lot of companies, that there are special departments which become more productive, and then the other departments become the bottleneck to that. So the same thing about quality. There is a different thing about quality in an administrator and an operator. So what the management wants from you is basically they want you to be agile and they want you to be stable. But they don't show you how. They just tell you always you have to do both. And then if you say, yeah, can you tell me why? They think, what? And then they say, no, we don't. We are management. We're giving you goals, right? We're giving you targets. So please do that. Yeah, this can be quite frustrating. But I think the solution is not to argument that you should be more agile or more stable, but you should get the guys on the other side and start some dialogue with those guys. That you improve a kind of company feeling, saying, no, it's we. And what can we do to make it more stable and more agile at the same time? It's possible because you have to simplify the workflows, that's all. So usually you have the blame game. So people are quarreling, and depending on how big the egos are in your companies, it can be quite nice, or it can be a pain in the ass. Then you have some leaders which are leading by delegation. So how do they solve the problem of this, this conflict? They are going to hire a consultant, which comes to your company, and he starts consulting you about DevOps and all that stuff. And after you had the consultancy, they say, yeah, you understood that, what is those guys saying? So we can continue as we are, but please now make DevOps. We'd make no change in organization or something like that. Of course, you have the other guys, leading by command guys. They say, we make DevOps now. And they tell this to your manager, and your manager comes to you and say, yeah, now operator, you have to go to the 10 guys in the development department, and you have to sit with them now. And can you feel, I don't know, you all developers, or is there an operator with you? Except Tristan, of course. How do you feel if you kind of, I don't know, what's a good example would be like an Austrian, and you have to sit with 9 Germans, huh? It's frightening. I would be frightened as an operator if they tell me something like that. So, okay, the main thing I think we should understand is to get some mutual respect of people. So we have to appreciate what people know. And people from administration and people from development, they have different knowledge. And somehow we have to get these things together. And we have to appreciate it on both sides, of course. So the developer usually has a lot of know-how on application development. So you get Redis, you have Groovy, Java, Jenkins, and so on. But slightly we have here some Docker. This is slightly problem because we have overlaps now. And that we have really to, how do you say, we have to see, okay, the developers have to learn more about operations, but also on the not so nice operation side. Like I was doing some stuff and I found out, oh, this Tomcat is running in development mode on production for some 3 years. And no one knew about it because the developers never cared that there is something like a production mode in Tomcat. So that means the awareness from the developer has to increase. But of course, also the awareness of the administrators has to increase. They should not just stick to can I configure Apache or how can I set up a Debian thing. They both have to somehow merge into each other's domain. They don't need to be experts, but at least they should understand the principles of how things work. Because how can I be an operator if I don't, in a Java company which does some Java development, if I don't understand the build system? For me, it's nonsense. So if developers start with admin skills, usually it looks like that after. They start very simple, and they think, oh, there's no problem with setting up a system, but they don't have the experience. So if you are one of those operator guys and you've done 3 or 4 of those systems, you do it like that. Yeah, so any feedback from you already, or? Yeah.
It seems like you're talking about the full stack DevOps, the full stack developer, right? You're a specialist in one particular domain, but you must understand the full stack at least. I don't know if that's the same, but it sounded like, hey, look abroad, look further, understand what's going on, understand the others. And yes, I agree. It's a great advantage. There's nothing actually you should have to preach. It's something that people should want by themselves because they will have an advantage by that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a startup, there is no problem at all. Those guys are automatically DevOps because they are just startup guys, right? And then suddenly someone says, oh, can you set up this thing in the cloud? And they says, oh, I can do it. And after that, you are the operations expert, right? So basically, you have the same people, and they're just doing different jobs, and they have somehow the same know-how. But if you go to the bigger companies, which have the money, actually, there you have guys, you have some command line monkeys, and those guys they are logging into Linux shells since 10 years, and they know Bash, and that's it. Or you have some Java monkeys, which are just programming, they are moving one property from the left to the right every day. And there, I think the conflict is more in those companies. In the small companies, I don't see any conflict. For them, DevOps is something natural. So if you're working in a bigger company, I think you're in trouble. Because either you want something and you have to change something in operations, which maybe you have already given up, because you don't know how to tackle it, or the operator, which is fed up with the guys who always give you some new technology stuff. So, as I said, a startup, it's cool. E-commerce, I would say it's in the middle. They are already making money, they have some structures, but they are still young, so it's okay. If you're insurance and banking, you're really fucked. Unfortunately, the last, the part where I was working in was in a bank, and I could see the mechanisms, how they work, and you need 1 week to apply for a virtual machine, and you don't get any vagrant on your machine because it's security problems and so on. So if you set up a new stack, I told these guys, okay, it's not your culture. Usually I have to be in your company to be paid, but I'm not going, I go to the hotel. And I will be 1 week in the hotel, and I will set up a Hadoop stack on my laptop, and when it's running, I will come back, and I will do it in your environment. And they said, yeah, okay, Richard, you can do that. And it worked. But if I would have started that provisioning with Puppet and all that stuff inside of the bank, it would have taken me at least 6-7 weeks. I mean, it's a big thing, but people in those companies, they can't imagine that, because for them, they're used to it. I mean, like with Tristan's company, we are currently it's really cool. In 6 weeks, we set up a complete build pipeline, infrastructure. We have a nice product. With the bank, it wouldn't have happened. You need 3 weeks to get your PC and all that stuff. So for the DevOps, usually the daily business, it's before DevOps, is that the developer on Friday, they do some program and testing, then you have the QA which runs the tests, you label the release, and then you go home. Because over the weekend you will not release, because you're not confident of your release process. And the developers don't want to be called on the weekend. The administrator on Monday, he starts installation and monitoring, all is green, and then he goes home. And then in the night, he gets this famous SMS on his Nagios, and he tells him, oh, what the fuck? And he tries somehow to limit the damage. And there is, I don't know, is there anyone in your company which has, as a developer, which can be called at night if something goes wrong? Yeah, oh, cool, one. I was trying to suggest that, and then I said, oh, we have Betriebsrat. You need to have a special license to do that at all. This is really, I mean, the credibility and the respect from operators you can only get if you're also responsible for what you do. So at least if that guy finds out there's a problem, he should be allowed to call you and ask you, how can I limit the damage? So that, for me, that would be one suggestion I would give to companies saying like, yeah, you have to somehow also change the culture of development. But in a big company, what you get is, you get a manager, okay? And he starts organizing a meeting then first. And then IT ops and dev heads first get the scolding, and then you get a second meetup with the team. And of course, you have to report on all levels. And at the end, you always get this, oh, we've been really great. And as a techie, I usually get the feeling saying like, oh, fuck you. I don't want to hear that. I want that things are working smoothly. I don't want to have this, yes, we did it after some really shit work we had to do to fix this. So managers for me are like this tape thing, okay? They have not a real value. They try to bridge the gap between two things which don't fit together. And this we have to change. So for me, DevOps still works. But you have to be very much clear. You should have something like the A-team guys. Yeah? It's very heterogenic teams, but they have respect for each other. They are all differently crazy, and but they still work somehow together. So when I was working for the dating company, I got some strange people there. Okay? And I liked them because they were strange in a way that it fitted nicely the work. So I don't need a lot of, how do you say, very homogenic, harmonic people. I need people who really are motivated and want to achieve something. And of course, we need goals. And this is a part of also management has to do. And unfortunately, there are not so many managers who really can give good goals, and then they get out of the way. They just say, okay, I set you my business goals, and now you won't see me for half a year, and after that I come and you please tell me and show me what you did. So this Varifocal, I think this is quite a popular one. You build it, you run it. I like that very much. So I always try to get into teams where you're responsible, where you have some autonomy of what you do. And if you talk about DevOps, for me, it's about agile and it's about autonomy. That means you have little teams, you have smaller teams, and they can make their own decisions, and somehow you can make things run, and you're responsible for it. So autonomy is something very important. And yeah, you can have black sheep, that's no problem. And it's about simplicity also. So if you talk about automating things, and also with Docker and Puppet and all that stuff, for me it's a possibility to automate something, but before you start, you should first think about simplicity. How can I simplify things? I don't want to automate in the first place, I want to make it simple. And please don't make it easy, okay? Don't buy some IBM bullshit or something like that. Yeah? With which your manager says, yeah, it's so easy, you can click this and that. Yeah? You know about that. Yeah, and the other thing is about empathy. I don't know if everyone can have that. I think it's some personal part, but at least the company culture can promote it. Like in the cellar down there, I found it very nice. There is this thing which says, okay, don't question that people are not contributing the best they do. Don't start to put some, how do you say, some blame on people or something. Just take them what they do, but it's always their best effort to do that. Yeah, and you have to sometimes start to be creative to change silos, okay? Like with banks, and they tell you, oh, it's about this audit and so on. Maybe it's good if you start reading that audit and really read it and say, but you say they're not saying this and this and this and this. This is your interpretation of that. That's my way of doing it. If someone tells me bullshit, I start reading about the bullshit, and then if I know about it, I can argue against it. So don't let you stop if someone says it's not possible because there is some rule for that. Rules can always be questioned. And I think cloud computing is a big way of really changing it. But the problem, what I see with bigger companies is they are not doing cloud computing. It's always those startup guys who do cloud computing. I always want to do cloud computing, but I can't because those guys, they still have their VMware machines around. But maybe we can even change that a little bit by using OpenStack or anything that you can push a button and then you have a virtual machine. I don't care if it's a Docker container or a VM. I just want something where I can do something with it. So, and the processes, they should be coarse-grained. That means you should have a lot of autonomous teams and then some big company interface where those teams can interact with each other, but on a very loosely coupled, like a kind of messaging system. But often you find hierarchical companies which are very strictly in organization. The same security or context and constraints. If you want to change things together, you should always question the context. You should say, okay, why is this picture of how things should work that way? And is it really the truth? Should it be really done like that, or it's just a kind of result of some not working process? So, you have any concerns?
I think that's more like in addition to what you're saying, or emphasis, because you've been talking about goals, what people have, and I think as far as I see it, that's the most important and the most breaking point in DevOps, that there are different people in a company who have way different goals, and they sometimes, or most of the times, contradict each other. You have the administrators, your Vishnu guys, and it's their goal to have things stable and keep them running, and they get bashed or blamed if things break, and they get no praise if you release.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the developers who don't care about stability, but just about building shit. Yeah? And in the end, the company is about having a product, making money, and not about these kind of smallish goals. Yeah. And as soon as you start doing a half-assed DevOps, where you, like what you said, take this one operations guy out of the team, put him into the dev team, but keep him with the same goals. If it's still his goal to keep things running, nothing will improve. He's just called DevOps, and he sits in an office he does not like.
Yeah, and he's a loner. Usually he's lonely, yeah? As an operator. No one talks my language, okay? And I'm kind of second level or third level kind of human being, because all others are architects, designers, blah, blah, blah. And they just say, Richard, can you provision me this, please, now? Huh? And that's why also you see when you go to companies and say, does DevOps work for you? Often you see, yeah, we had this already. We had this operator with a Scrum team. And then he said, either I go or you pull me back into the operations team. Yeah, because for me, this is not the culture. I mean, it's a fundamental change, but people in those companies don't understand that. And you're right. I think they should be paid for the same thing. As an operator, I want to also be paid if innovation happens. But I think the manager, they think they are clever because they think, okay, if I have a protagonist and he's an antagonist, and somehow those two struggle, and from that struggle comes something positive. But if you look in the reality, what comes out of this struggle is nothing. It just remains as it is. And some people find this comforting. They find this positive because they are very conservative. So they say, okay, if we keep the system like it is, then it's good. But if you watch the reality now, it's not like that, right? I mean, Google or Flickr or Twitter, they are not come out of this kind of competition. They come out of a culture where people are pulling on the same end of the rope. They're not against each other and trying to keep this thing in balance. But for that, you have to educate people. And this is a problem. Like when I had a talk with Concentrics, there were a lot of ops guys. Okay, they were quite excited about it. And usually you talk a lot about developer guys. But where are the conferences where you have those two guys together? This is, I think, the main problem, that you still have this kind of silo there. yeah, so for me, DevOps can work, and I, like with Tristan's company, we made it work. Maybe we have to get Tristan a little bit more involved in the whole thing also. But I can also see companies where it doesn't work, where it's a pain in the ass, where the management says we have to become agile now and we have to do DevOps, and where people are just burned. They're just, if you're in such a situation, I think now you should just go. You just say, cool, it's a good environment, you get a good job, so leave the company. Thank you.